Om Sarashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Be seated, please. Parameshwara. I think some of the lights aren't on. I was just noticing half of the lights on this side of the room are not on. Yeah. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. So we are continuing with our special topics. Last week we took up the topic of Swadharma, had a very interesting conversation. Today, Dharma. And the relationship between the two is pretty obvious, but there's much more we need to understand about Dharma. Again, as I said last week, the word Dharma depends on its context. So in the context of Swadharma, it meant personal responsibility. Any other cell phones can be turned off, please. So in the context of Swadharma, Dharma meant responsibility. Swadharma, personal responsibility. Now we're taking Dharma in a more general sense, so we need a more general meaning, and we're going to develop it as we go along. But in the starting point, we'll say is righteousness. Again, there are many other meanings, but in terms of our today's context. Dharma in the sense of righteousness, in the sense of what is right, what is wrong, morality, ethics, etc. That's our topic. I have fond memory of teaching this to children. We used to have a lot of children's classes years ago. In fact, we had, I think, a younger community, and we had a lot of children back then. So we had weekly or bi-weekly classes for children, and Dharma was one of the topics. And I would introduce it like this. Said, your Christian and Jewish friends have a list of 10 commandments that are found in the Old Testament of the Bible. And the children knew that. They're all Hindu children, obviously. So then I asked them, well, if your Christian and Jewish religions, if they have 10 commandments, how many commandments do we have in Hinduism? The answer was very revealing. And one girl thought for a moment and said, there must be, 200? Now I found that very revealing of her impression of Hinduism, is that it has hundreds of rules. Do this, don't. You can almost imagine what her home was like. Lots of rules at home. And anyway, that was the opening point for the topic. And the fact is there are no commandments in the Hindu tradition. There's no list of commandments. There are no commandments. And then you're thinking, but let me explain. You think, but Swamiji, it says satyam vada, speak truth. Isn't that a commandment? I'll circle back to that in just a minute. It's not a commandment, and I'll show you why. There's a problem, a fundamental problem with commandments, in that they are looked upon as moral absolutes. Satyam vada, don't lie, speak truth, as a moral absolute. The problem is, life is way too complicated to navigate life with these oversimplified moral absolutes. It just doesn't work. Moral absolute looks in terms of black and white. As you know very well, our lives are anything but black and white. Decision making today is not a black and white. Things are not obvious. We say everything is in a gray zone. It's someplace in between. We need something, we need guidance which has enough finesse and flexibility to address the complexity of life. Moral absolutes don't work. Now, when you say, but Swamiji, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, it says, Satyam Vada, speak truth. Here's the problem of turning that into a commandment. It's not a commandment. If you turn it into a commandment, there's my favorite story that's used to explain that is a rich man is walking through a village. He's chased by a thief. He tries to get away from the thief. He sees a cottage. He runs inside the cottage. Inside the cottage was a Swami meditating. The Swami is startled. Kya hua? What happened? Who are you? What is all this? And the man explains, I'm being chased by the thief. And the Swami says, okay, lay down on my cot and pull what do you say? Chadar upar lao. I don't know if my Hindi is right anyway. Pull the cover over you, laying on the cot. And then a moment later, the thief comes in, having seen this man run inside. And he addresses the Swami, where is he? The thief is asking the Swami, where is he? Swami has studied the Taittiriya Upanishad. The Swami knows, Satyam Vada. Will the Swami tell the truth? Absolutely not. The Swami will say, yeah, I saw him. Where? He said, I'll show you. The Swami takes the guy outside, points down the road, and says, he went that way. If you run really fast, you might be able to catch up to him. Swami is clever. Did the Swami, this is the starting point now. Did the Swami tell a lie? Absolutely. Come on. Don't try to make excuses. That's a lie. Did the Swami follow Dharma? Absolutely. Therefore, lying is Dharma. What? This is what I said, that moral absolutes don't work. We have to have more finesse in dealing with these issues. You can't boil it down to Satyam Vada. Our approach has to be more nuanced to handle all kinds of complicated situations like the one I just described. So if we don't have a list of commandments, if commandment-based morality or dharma is not a feature in the Hindu tradition, then what is the basis for deciding what is right or what is wrong? What is it that made it right for the Swami to tell a lie in that situation, but it might be wrong to tell a lie in another situation? So let's examine some other bases for establishing what is dharma. Some people, especially in modern, not only in modern times, but some people are like to say you should follow your conscience. Not consciousness. Conscience is that inner sense of right and wrong, that feeling that what is right or wrong. In fact, that conscience often has like a voice. Don't do it, don't do it. You know what that is? Yeah. Whose voice is that usually? If you listen very carefully, 9 times out of 10, it's your mother's voice. Don't do it. Don't do it. And, in psychology, in fact, Freud and others were famous for analyzing this, and basically we understand it today as an internalized external source of authority. There's an external source of authority that kind of gets lodged in our minds. Could be mother, could be father, could be a teacher, or all of the above. And that voice of external authority gets inculcated, gets internalized. That's what we call conscience. So, is conscience a valid means for determining what is dharma? Is that what drove the Swami to tell a lie? He was following his conscience. And the answer is, surprisingly, no. And the reason the answer is no is that your conscience, that inner sense of right and wrong, is based on your authority figures, like your parents. Suppose your authority figures are not good authority figures. I'll make up another story. This is a brand new story. Let's see how it goes. Suppose you were raised in India several hundred years ago in a certain family known as Thagi. Thagi was a hereditary group of thieves, generation after generation, like a caste of thieves, subcaste of thieves. In fact, the modern word thug comes from that name, Thagi. So, suppose you were born to Mr. and Mrs. Thagi, and they raised you very nicely and taught you how to rob people. And you're on a road robbing someone, and somebody says, and whoever you're robbing, you're a child now. And as a child, you're already starting to rob people. And somebody you're robbing, you're attempting to rob, looks at you and says, you're just a child. Don't you know that it's wrong to rob people? What does your conscience say? And as a child, you say, my conscience says I'm supposed to rob you. That's what the child was taught, right? So let's be very clear. Conscience is not always a valid means for determining what is right and wrong. Tell me, were all the authority figures in your life perfect? Even our parents, not perfect. Which means there could be some flaws in our inborn sense of right and wrong. It's not an absolute guide. Then what? So no commandments, not conscience. Then next one, Swamiji, you should ask your guru. I'm shaking my head because it depends on what guru you ask. You might get some very strange advice. But setting that aside, the responsibility to figure out what is right and wrong, the responsibility is yours, not your guru's. In fact, your guru doesn't know the situation in which you find yourself. You're the only person who knows all the details of the situation. And what I'm leading up to is that dharma is situational. It depends on the context. Just like the meaning of the word dharma depends on its context. In the same way, the content of that word dharma, what is right and wrong, depends on the context. In the context of the sadhu sitting in his cottage, lying was dharma in that situation. So it's up to you, knowing your situation. No guru, no one can know the situation better than you. So you are in the best position to figure out what is dharma. But now we need some guiding principle. And that's what I introduced in class last week. We have not a list of commandments, but we have a guiding principle, a central principle of dharma, which, as I described last week, is ahimsa. The statement comes, ahiṁsā paramo dharmaḥ. Ahimsa, non-injury, which I rephrased as least injury. I'll come back to that in a moment. The path of least injury is parama dharma. It is the highest expression of dharma. It is the main expression of dharma. This is such an important central principle. It is so central. Just to share this with you, I looked it up. That phrase, ahiṁsā paramo dharmaḥ, occurs in the Mahabharata 5 times. By the way, one thing, I'm not a big fan of artificial intelligence because it makes lots of mistakes. One thing it's good at is looking things up. Really. So, I mean, to go through the 84,000 verses of the Mahabharata would take a while. How long did it take ChatGPT? Not even a second. So it gave me the answer. So that expression, ahiṁsā paramo dharma, occurs in the Mahabharata has 18 books. The first book, the Adi Parva, it occurs once. The second book, the third book, Vana Parva, it occurs. And then in the Anushasana Parva, later in the 13th book, it occurs 3 times. And the last of those times, here's an example, just beautiful. There's a verse in the Anushasana Parva, ahiṁsā paramo dharmaḥ, ahimsa is the main principle of dharma, tata, and ahiṁsā paro dhammaḥ. Ahimsa is the most powerful dhamma, self-restraint. The most powerful form of dhamma, self-restraint, is ahimsa, to restrain from causing harm. The second half of the verse, ahiṁsā paramam dhanam. Beautiful. The paramo dhanam, the best gift you could give is ahimsa. By the way, when you take vows of sannyasa, that's one of the vows. It's a vow of ahimsa. So it's a gift. Sarva bhutebhyaha ahimsa. You give the gift, when you take sannyasa, you give the gift of ahimsa to all living beings. So it is the paramam dhanam, the most expensive gift you could give, not expensive in terms of cost. And finally, ahimsa paramam tapaha. It is paramam tapas, the highest form of austerity. So that's 5 times. Then it comes in 6 more times with a different phrasing. Instead of using ahimsa, there's an alternate word that can be used, very tongue twister, anrishamsyam. Say that 10 times. Anrishamsyam. Anishramsa means non-cruelty, non-maliciousness. So anrishamsyam means the same as ahimsa. It means not causing harm. Usually it's translated compassion or mercy, but it ends up having the same meaning. as ahimsa. So the phrase comes anrisham syam paro dharmaḥ, which has exactly the same meaning. That comes in the Vanaparva, the third book. That comes 4 times. It comes twice in the Shanti Vana, the fifth book, and twice more in the Anushasana. Oh, that's 8 times total. So do you think it's an important concept if it's mentioned so many times? And that's just in the Mahabharata. What about in all the other scriptures? So you get the point. It is absolutely central to practicing Dharma. And I want to pick up on one thread, and then I'll invite your questions. Let me see here. Oops. Where is that? Here. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah. So I said least harm. And I just want to, I said that last week, I just want to pick up on that one more time. It's impossible to live with causing 0 harm. Because when you eat, you can choose not to eat animals. You can't choose not to eat plants, and plants are killed. And if you choose not to kill plants, you're killing this one. So the of ahimsa does not mean none. In fact, in Sanskrit, that has 5 different meanings. One of those 5 is alpa, minimum. Like when you say, I don't have any money. Does it mean you have 0 in your bank account? It means you don't have much money. So the of ahimsa means least harm. So then ahimsa paramo dharma means whenever you make a choice, you must choose the path that causes the least amount of harm to everyone involved. Everyone involved includes you, but includes you not at a higher status. It includes you as an equal part of the whole picture. So whatever course of action leads to the least harm for everyone involved, that is the right course of action. So in the Mahabharata, there are so many examples. I gave the example last week in the Bhagavad Gita, which, as you know, is a small part of the Mahabharata. Sri Krishna tells Arjuna to fight and kill. And in that context, in those unique circumstances, fighting and even killing his own family members, in that unique situation was dharma. Why? Because for Arjuna not to fight, the consequences would have been far worse. And that shows how to evaluate what is the course of least action, least harm, is to evaluate what are the consequences. If I do A, what are the consequences? When I do B, what are the consequences? We must examine the consequences. This is the style of the Mahabharata, is to show you the consequences. I'll give one last example, and then we'll take your questions. This example shows how the Mahabharata teaches Dharma through examples by showing consequences. Many people make a mistake of holding Bhishma up as a role model because he refused to give up holding on to his 3 vratas. He made 3 vows. The story is long and complicated, so this is not the time for a long, complicated story. But he made 3 vows to his father. Bhishma did. 3 vows, and he refused to renege on those vows against all The, the situation, I don't want to tell the whole long story, but there was a terrible war, the Mahabharata war was about to break out. Had Bhishma reneged on his vows, he could have avoided that terrible war. He held on to the vows. Now, a very common misinterpretation of the Mahabharata is that we should all be like Bhishma. Once we make a decision, we should hold on to it no matter what. The whole story of the Mahabharata shows the terrible consequence of Bhishma holding on to those vows rigidly. He was overly rigid, and the Mahabharata shows the horrible consequences of his rigidity. In that unique circumstance in which Bhishma found himself, he should, according to the principle of Ahimsa, he should have reneged on his vows for the sake of preventing the war from taking place. And just this, we can talk a lot about this, we won't, but I'll just make a point here. One of the unique and amazing, marvelous, powerful ways that the Mahabharata teaches us is by showing how even great people make mistakes. Bhishma was arguably the greatest of them all. But as great as he was, as wise as he was, he made this and other mistakes as well, but this one in particular. And the consequence of his mistake was horrible. And that's what the Mahabharata shows us, is the consequence of our mistakes can be terrible. We should anticipate the best we can. What are those consequences? And there are several ways of doing that, many ways of doing that. The simplest way is just sit down and think about it. If I do this, what will happen? Actually, our brains are wired to predict the future. Look it up. You'll be amazed how much of the wiring of our brains is specifically designed for prediction. We all have a gift. Of course, none of us are perfect, of course. In fact, most of us, myself included, were pretty bad at it. But for ordinary situations, we got a pretty good idea of what will happen. For example, what do you think is going to happen in about 20 minutes? Yeah, and this class will come to an end. So you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. So we can use that God-given power. And when I say God-given, Ishvara, this is Ishvara's intelligent order. We are all blessed with brains and minds that are exceptionally well prepared to analyze situations and to try to determine what will happen. If I take this course of action, what will be the consequences? If I take that course of action, what will be the consequences? If I take no course of action, what will be the consequences? Now, our process will be flawed, but even though it's flawed, it's still pretty good. And there are places where maybe we don't understand a situation well enough, then you should get some advice. If the situation is so complex and you don't understand it, then go seek some advice. And from any appropriate person, whoever is an authority in that particular area, go and consult that authority and get some advice. And then based on that advice, but ultimately, who makes the decision is not that authority figure, the one who evaluates the situation to determine what course of action will result in the least harm for everyone involved. That decision is up to you. You make the decision the best you can, and then, I mentioned this also last week, then tomorrow, if you find that you made the wrong decision, change your decision. That's it. Which means you make a decision and you see what happens. And if you're seeing unfortunate, unexpected, unintended consequences, then do whatever you can to correct your course, so to speak. As I gave this metaphor long ago. The NASA blasts off these rockets. In fact, we were talking about ISRO, the Indian Space Agency, launching these rockets. How to launch a rocket towards, and it has to be at exactly the right speed and location to enter into orbit, and this rocket weighs 1 million pounds. How can you launch that 1 million pound rocket so accurately? And some of you know you can't. You can't just boom, and it goes flying up and it doesn't just automatically hit its target. You launch it, and then you do a course correction, and another course correction, and another, and another, and another, constantly. In fact, there's circuitry inside the rocket that is constantly adjusting where it goes, because it's those constant adjustments that keeps it on course. So that's a good way of understanding our behavior after making a decision on what you think is the best course of action that causes the least harm for everyone involved. After having made that decision, what follows is constant course correction. Again and again. And don't think, go back to the Bhishma story. I made a decision, I'm going to stick with it. That's not dharma. That's rigidity. Let's call it the good old American word, stubbornness. That's not dharmic. So, anyway, to continue, this would be an excellent place to invite some of you to come up and present a complicated situation that you confront, or that you think about hypothetically, a situation where it's difficult to determine what is the course of least action. So as we did last week, you can come up and to the microphone and ask your question. Please, someone would come up. I'm sure there will be questions on this topic. A question about what is dharma in a complicated situation. Oh, I don't believe that. Actually, better word is here, Suresh, because it'll get less feedback. Yeah. Okay, you need to turn up number 1. Okay.
Hello? Yep.
Louder, please. We won't hear it. Turn it up.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Okay. You have a question, please come.
May I request everyone who is coming up to the microphone to ask questions, get close enough, and speak into the microphone.
A little too loud. Good. And after you ask your question, if you have a follow-up, then stay. If you don't have a follow-up question, then you're welcome to go back to your seat. Please.
Okay. Hello. All right. Hey, good morning, Swami. I have this question. It's philosophical problem. You probably already heard of it, like the train track problem, where you have, say, I'm just going to pose it like this. Say on one side you have our presidential cabinet, and on the other side you have your family. We need our cabinet to make sure everybody gets their benefits, they get where they need to go, but that's my family. Who am I to even make that choice?
Good. That's a great example. There are many variations of this philosophy. If you go to a undergraduate class in philosophy or ethics, they'll give you all of these these questions. And basically, they're all kind of the same. You have a choice. Either this one person dies or these 10 people die. That's kind of how it comes down to. 1 versus 10. Or 10 versus one family member, I think is kind of the sense of yours. So how to make a decision in those horrible situations. Well, first of all, thank goodness, those are generally their hypothetical situations. But suppose there was a genuine situation. In fact, let's take a real world one, which is, I think, very similar to this. And obviously these are going to be really, there's a modern word for this called gnarly. How's that? They're gnarly questions, very convoluted question. I think a great modern example is at the end of World War II. The Japanese were refusing to surrender. And just to set the stage, we're going to talk about the decision to drop the atomic bomb. I think this is a far better example rather than these hypothetical ones. This is one of the, I think, most complicated ethical issues in history. So the Japanese had functionally lost the war. They were already being bombed to smithereens. They were dropping incendiary bombs on Tokyo and other. They were being burnt alive. It was horrible. But there was something about Japanese culture where they wouldn't surrender. Their cultural orientation did not give them surrender as an option. They couldn't surrender. But then they were continuing to get bombed again and again and again. Now, on the United States side, the United States was now preparing to launch a land invasion of the main island of Japan. There were estimates that 100,000, 200,000 soldiers would die in that land invasion, not to mention how many Japanese would die in that land invasion. So now, here's the deal. If we boil it down to numbers, and that's your stories were numbers. So either one person dies or 10 people die. Either 10 people die or my one family member die. This kind of number games. So if we play this number game in Japan, so the estimates were that several 100,000 people would die through a land invasion. And the United States chose to drop 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as you all know. And turns out several 100,000 people died as a result of those bombs. So people are going to die in either event. If that's the case, numbers might not be the most reliable guide to making that decision. I mean, 1 life versus 10. It makes sense, but if you look at it deeply, that one person doesn't deserve to die for the sake of the 10. On the other hand, least harm suggests that, one person should die if 10 people can live. So you can see the difficulty of looking at it through a purely mathematical lens, 1 versus 10. Then what? Well, first of all, there was a lot of politics driving the United States Here, something you may not know about. As long as I've given this example, let me just finish this and we'll take your question. There's a backstory some of you might not know, and that is the politics driving the decision of the United States to drop the bombs. The Cold War was about to break out, and the United States knew that they were going to be fighting with the Soviet Union. This was already well understood in 1946 or 45, whenever it was. It was well understood. And the United States wanted, this is well recorded, and it's one of the sad stories, and that was there was political pressure to drop the bombs. The political pressure was to show the Soviet Union that the United States had atomic bombs. That was political pressure on Truman, who was the president at the time. So the decision to drop the bombs was partially to bring the war to an end with an enemy that was unable to surrender for the sake of preventing several 100,000 deaths of American soldiers through a land invasion. From that perspective, that arguably could be considered dharmic. If that were the whole story, that the United States, by dropping the atomic bombs, if it brought a war to an end without a land invasion, which would have ended up causing more harm than the bombs. Let us presume that the land invasion would have caused more harm than the bombs. If that were the whole story, then it would be dharma to drop those horrible weapons. But it's not the whole story. That's where things get messy. So there was also a political agenda to demonstrate, there was a political agenda to demonstrate to the Soviet Union that we had the bombs, don't mess with us, was the message. And that perspective, I think, is indefensible. That's not dharma, to have that power move. Anyway, I'm using this as a rather elaborate example just to show how complicated it is. I said that Ahimsa Paramo Dharma is the main principle, but it's not easy to apply in really complicated situations. Okay, please, what is your question?
Good morning, Swamiji. I've heard once that we have like several different dharmas. Like you can have your dharma as a mother, your dharma as a sister, your dharma as a wife.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, is there a hierarchy between like when you have to make a decision as a mother, like how do you
tough, right?
reconcile? Like
Good. There are competing needs, competing agendas. That actually relates quite well to our topic last week, because you're now talking about dharma from the standpoint of you as a mother, as a wife, as a person, all of these, from all these perspectives. So that really is a matter of swadharma. So, and of course, swadharma is based on dharma. So what is your responsibility? When you say your dharma as a mother, so that's not dharma in the sense of righteousness. That's dharma in the sense of responsibility. So this is going back to last week's discussion. Today's discussion was talking about dharma as righteousness. But when you say, what is my dharma as a mother? That's not dharma as righteousness, That's dharma as personal responsibility. And then you can ask, well, is it my responsibility to be a good mother? Or is it my responsibility to be a good wife? Is it my responsibility to be a good citizen? Is it my responsibility to be a good human being? And of course, the answer to all those questions is yes, simultaneously. And that's when things get tricky. Many times in a family, your responsibility, a good example in many, many families is if your parents are still alive, you have a responsibility to your parents, and you also have a responsibility to your spouse. And those often come in conflict. Not once in a while, but especially I just happen to observe in Indian families, that seems to be quite common, more so than in, say, American families. So how to handle that? So suppose the mother and wife has one responsibility to her family and to her husband. She also has a responsibility to her parents, suppose, if her parents are still here. How to navigate those situations where different people have different needs, and your responsibility, I'm going to make a point here by being a little extreme. Your responsibility as a mother is to meet everyone's needs. I'm exaggerating it to make a point. Does that statement make any sense at all? Your responsibility is to make sure every single person's needs are met. Your parents, your husband, your children, your neighbors, the IRS. It is your personal responsibility to ensure that everyone's needs are completely met. That's absurd. Absolutely absurd. And I think a common problem is when we lose track of how absurd it is to put upon us that responsibility. You can't, this is said how many times? You can't do it all. You can only do the best you can. And when you do the best you can, some people will feel you're not doing your best. You're doing the best you can, but somebody will end up they'll feel, what do they say, on the short side somehow. Someone will end up feeling neglected. And they may even tell you, you're neglecting me. What to do? You're doing the best you can to deal with all these competing needs. Somebody feels neglected. What should you do? Listen and understand. Now, understanding doesn't mean changing what you do. You've already made a determination that this needs to be done first, this needs to be done second. This person is number 5, and they're complaining because they're in 5th place. In your estimation, that's the best setup. That you have these other 4 priorities which must come first. This poor person ends up in the 5th position. They feel neglected. They tell you you're neglected. Your job then is to be understanding and compassionate. Your job is not to reorder your whole life to accommodate that person's unreasonable demands on your time and energy. It's not for them to decide their priority in your life. You determine the priorities. If they feel like their priority isn't high enough, I don't want to sound rude, but it's their problem. Your responsibility then is not to fulfill their needs. Your responsibility is to do the best you can while acknowledging the person's difficulties. That's an important part. If somebody makes an unrealistic demand on you, you don't tell them to, go away. You handle it gracefully, with compassion and understanding. I hope that addresses the question. You have a question, please come.
Namaste, Swamiji. Thank you so much for the lecture. My question might have been in part answered by your previous response, but today's lecture really had me thinking about a situation I became aware of recently that I think really highlights the complexity in understanding ahimsa when it's, maybe there's something, what do we owe to ourselves, I guess, versus to other people? Sometimes when it's looking at a situation between people, it's
right.
easier.
Can I ask you to give a particular example? Because it's a very big, general topic. Give a particular example.
Sure. So I know someone from a different state who is queer in a community that is very conservative, with a family that is not accepting. And when I met with her, it was very easy for me to be like, this is your life and you need to do what you need to do. But I also see this person struggling a lot with the implications for her parents and how embedded they are with their community and all of these externalities. So it's kind of an extension of the one person versus many harm type thing, but also clearly it's so painful for this person themselves. And I just wonder if there's a framing to apply.
Are you talking about from your standpoint or from your friend's standpoint?
From my friend's standpoint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So suppose, thank you. That's a really good question. I think maybe we'll let this be the last question for today, because it's an important one and something we can talk about for a few minutes. Suppose you are a young adult, I'm presuming, in this situation, and you know very well that you are attracted to same sex, queer, homosexual, and if you are perhaps in a Hindu family and a Hindu community, you might be in an environment which is not very accepting. How to handle that situation. And you said very nicely, it's a conflict between a responsibility to yourself versus a responsibility to others. So responsibility to others is kind of obvious. Parents want you to grow up, get married, and have children. Community wants you to fit in, and some people have very narrowly defined perspective about what fits in. And sadly, for some people, what fits in means only being heterosexual. And I've mentioned this before, that it's time for us to grow up. Nature is not black and white. Human beings are not just male and female. It's everything in between. You realize there are about 24 intersex conditions, medical conditions. Someone is born, congenital conditions. You're born in a condition which is neither stereotypically male nor stereotypically female. Why should we expect nature to be either male or female? And something I've mentioned before, in nature, there's plenty of homosexual activity. I mean, the most famous example are one of our these tree of species. We are Homo sapiens is our species. Well, we're closely related to the bonobos, which is a group of chimps. They're not chimps, they're a kind of ape, bonobos. And they use, interesting, the sociologists will make this observation, they use one of the few animal species that don't use sex exclusively for procreation. Just like human beings don't use sex exclusively for procreation. Most animals do, right? The vast majority of animal species, sex is only for the sake of procreation. Human beings are not unique in having sex for other reasons, and these bonobos are a great example of an animal species genetically very close to human beings, that a species that uses sex not just for procreation. They use it for being nice to each other. They use it for bonding. They use it for conflict resolution. And it is just as often same sex as it is different sex. So bonobos, closely related to human beings, are engaged in sexual activities, same-sex sexual activities, for the sake of reducing conflict, for the sake of bonding, for the sake of society, social. I'm just making this point just so that if any one of you here, or if any one of you watching this video, if you think there is a valid argument against being homosexual, you're holding on to an antiquated idea. It has no place at all in modern society to discriminate based on sexuality. In my view, not just my view, in the view of science, there is no basis whatsoever for discriminating against someone for his or her sexuality. That being said, now we can answer the question. That being said, people still have, that being said, the young person who is queer has a right to live his or her life as they choose. For parents, or for Hindu parents, or for Hindu society to discriminate against that person is baseless, as we just said. All of that being said, now we've got a secondary problem. And the problem is we have feelings. And things hurt. When parents have certain expectations for their children, and when those expectations are dashed, it hurts. So a young person dealing with their parents must necessarily be highly attuned to that hurt. Which is to say that, I think very few youngsters would do this, but occasionally there's someone who says, I am queer, get used to it. This kind of in-your-face activism which causes a lot of problems. It causes problems because it's not respectful of other people's emotions. Yes, a person who is queer, they're fine. They have no reason to discriminate against them. The problem comes if that person were to behave in manners, deliberately behave in ways that hurt other people. And this is where things get, let me just try to hone in on this. This is tricky. This young person has to live her life as a gay woman. Let's presume, as a lesbian woman. That will be hurtful to her parents. It will. But now, does it mean she shouldn't live her life as a gay woman? So she has her life, her parents have their lives, the parents are going to feel hurt when she says, I don't want to have a conventional marriage. So parents will feel hurt, but then what would be her response? She has to live her life. She's wired like that. She's born like that. By the way, you know that if you can't change nature, right? You can't convert one into another. Some people think that somebody who is homosexual can be somehow converted. All of the psychiatrists in the world have already said that's impossible. So the profession of psychiatry has made it very clear that there's no possibility of conversion. That's who she is, and she's fine. And we get it, that there's no reason for discrimination, no basis for discrimination, but there still remains the problem of hurt. How to handle that hurt? And the answer is as gently and as carefully as possible. It does not mean, this is an Indian story, less so in this country, but in India, let me just put it out, and I hope this conversation won't make you feel uncomfortable, but these are things that happen all the time. In India, there are many gay children who get married according to their parents' desires, and they have disastrous marriages as a result. This happens a lot. A lot. A gay woman or man will get married because that's what their parents expect, and they don't want to hurt their parents. They get married. How do those marriages go? I won't say almost always, but a lot of them are disastrous. So obviously that is not a good option. How to handle it then? I'll just end with a few comments here. When a parent first finds out that their son or daughter is gay, it's tough. And over the years, I've actually counseled quite a few families with this particular issue. What I've seen is that when parents refuse to consider any other possibility except for their expectation, they have their expectation, my son or daughter must get married, must have a family, etc., etc., etc. When a parent is unable to let go of that expectation, the outcomes are terrible. Usually, families get split. In my experience, those are a minority of families. Most of the time, what I've seen is that it takes parents a while to get used to the idea. It could take a long time, not days or weeks. It could take months or even years. But in my experience, most parents eventually get it. It's not easy. Parents struggle a lot with that. It's a complicated situation. It's a difficult situation, but most parents eventually get it, and the outcomes are wonderful. I've seen again and again. After that difficult time of coming to terms with it, the parents come about, and they understand exactly what I've told you. They understand that it's normal in terms of human development. It's not abnormal in any. Can I say that really clearly? It's not abnormal in any sense whatsoever. That's what science tells us. But we have these expectations. We have to deal with the expectations. Parents have to deal with those expectations, and then the child, the adult child, can do their best to be supportive of the parents as the parents are dealing with their own expectations. So on both sides, the parents have to be as open-minded and open-hearted as possible, but the youth also has to be as sensitive as possible to the difficulties faced by the parents. Very difficult, complicated situation. I hope my comments are helpful. And these are really a nice discussion about Dharma. We'll conclude today with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.